Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly radio show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. And today I'm speaking with Susan Herrera, the New Mexico State Rep for District 41. We'll get to Susan after a few short announcements. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land, and we want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We better learn from them and learn quickly. Last week, I spoke with Roger Montoya. He's the representative for House District 40, and just up the road from where Susan Herrera's district is. I also want to remind you that if you're driving around and miss any of today's show, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show and any prior interview by going to Retake Our Democracy and clicking on Retake on the Radio button on the right side of the homepage. You'll find YouTube recordings of all our previous shows. With the session over, Retake is beginning to focus on looming primaries, so we will be hosting interviews with candidates we support who are facing primary challenges. That focus began last week with our interview, or 2 weeks ago, with our interview with Rena Sapansky, and continued with interviews with Roger Montoya, and now with Susan Herrera, and next week with Andrea Romero. Our website at retakeourdemocracy.org will soon feature a page identifying the candidates we support and how you can support those candidates in their campaigns. We will also be initiating a range of proactive strategies to prepare for the 2023 legislative session. We've come to the conclusion that just advocating during the session doesn't get it done. We need to be more proactive. And so that work will include working very closely with key allies and legislators to cultivate interest, understanding, and support for bills we support. This will include presenting at interim hearings and engaging key legislators on the issues that Retake will be focusing on in 2022-23. If you want to get involved in our current advocacy work and help us frame and advance these strategies, please join our monthly Zoom huddle on the second Wednesday of each month from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Our next huddle is on April 13th from 6 to 7:30. You must register for the huddle by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and clicking on actions and events in the menu bar. A description of the huddle and a link to register appears near the top of the page. Stay tuned. Well, that's enough announcements. Let's get started. And we have just to let you know, we have a slightly unstable connection here. And so we're kind of fingers crossed we get through this without any problem. So hello, Susan, welcome to the show. Thanks for making time for this conversation.
Hey, Paul, it's good to see you. Good to be with everybody. Good to be with KSFR.
Okay, well, I always like to let our guests introduce themselves. So how about we start with you telling us a bit about yourself and how you got involved in policy and politics in general, and how that led you to running for and representing District 41.
Well, thanks for that question. I guess I have to say, as a child, my father was from northern New Mexico, born and raised, and his family moved during the Depression over to California, and I'd say actually after the Depression, pre-World War II, and so. But he carried this spirit of activism with him all his life. He ran for city council, was active on this, in our city. And I can remember him, he was an iron worker, and I can remember him running home from work and getting out of the car and running into the house to change his clothes because the Democratic National Convention was held in Los Angeles that year. And he'd come home every night. We'd wait up till 11 o'clock at night, and my dad would come home between 11 and 12, and he'd say, "Okay, kids, this is what happened. Johnson, he might have the votes, but I don't know. Union's backing him, but Kennedy's coming in tight. I think Kennedy's going to make it." So we would wait up every night at the kitchen table to hear him come back. If you can imagine, that's how Democratic National Conventions used to be. Anybody could walk in and look. You didn't have to have a badge. You didn't have to be secure. And, And he would come in, and I can remember being about 10 or 11 and just sitting at the kitchen table, I could hardly wait to hear what was happening at the national convention. And I think he then ran for city council. We were always active in our city elections and county elections. We knew all of our elected officials. I grew up in a family like that, so it kind of came natural. And then when I was 27, I was asked to work on a congressional campaign. That was the Watergate landslide year. This is how far back I go, Paul. And I was the first person hired on that staff, and we run by 600 votes in a congressional race. We called him Landslide Lloyd. And then I was, working at the local political district, and eventually went to DC, worked there. And then I was hired as director of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus in its, kind of the infancy. And I did that for 6 years and spent time in Washington. And then when my husband and I had our first boy and he was turning 4, we looked around and said, oh, we don't want to be in DC forever, but we did want to go back to California. And New Mexico had always been my second state. So we moved to New Mexico in 1990. And so I guess my whole life has been involved in public policy and politics. I've always served in nonprofit or government sectors. So it has led me to really understand how the process works. And I'll cut it off there. As you know, I could go on for hours on this.
That's all right. That's great. And it's good for our listeners to get to know you as a person, not just as a politician. So you've been involved in a couple of sessions now. What would you identify as your greatest accomplishment in the 2 sessions so far?
Well, I worked really hard for this. It was House Bill 132. It was to eliminate predatory lending in this state. As you know, currently, these predatory lenders can charge up to 175% interest rate on a small loan. And so we reduced that to 36% last session. People have been working on this for 14 years. I introduced that bill. I led the bill in the House. We passed it in the House. It went to the Senate with really very little debate on the Senate side and was signed by the governor. So I'm very proud of that legislation. I want everybody to know that I stand on the shoulders of a lot of people who have tried to pass that legislation and make it work. And it was a huge victory, Paul. And the reason it was a huge victory is we had 8 Republicans cross over and vote with the Democrats on that bill. That doesn't happen in the House. If you watch House votes, it's pretty much all Democrats and all Republicans, right? Maybe you'll have a few people stray from side to side, but mostly we vote all Democratic and all Republican. This time we had some major crossovers from the Republican Party, and people knew it was time to end this practice in New Mexico.
That's great. And it was certainly from our perspective, it's your biggest win as a legislator. And I have to ask you, whose idea was it to put an allocation in the bill so it could be deemed germane? Was that your idea or the speaker's?
Let me see. I have to go back. It was a speaker. He was a speaker. I said I wanted this bill to go to the CPAC committee. I wanted to go CPAC because I thought this was a consumer protection issue and not a commerce issue. It really represented a very small part of the commerce industry in our state, but a very large problem for consumers. So it went through CPAC. And then the speaker played a huge role in this, and everybody should know that. He really helped me every step of the way. And then the governor sent in a message just in the nick of time, and then it wasn't a question anymore. So I would say it was a full court press by the speaker, by the governor, and by every Democrat, and some good Republicans in the House. I just want everybody to know that.
Did you know that the governor was going to message the bill at the point when that was announced on the House floor? Did you know that was coming?
Well, we were all working it. Let me tell you that. Here's the deal. When I introduced the bill, I honestly didn't think it'd pass. I'm going to tell you that. I wanted it to pass. Yeah, I wanted it to pass, but I didn't think it would pass. And I just said, well, what the heck? I'm just going to throw it in. I'm going to throw it in the way I'd like to see it pass, and I did. And what happened was I knew if we had the votes, the governor would send a message. I mean, would the governor not send a message? She wanted to know what the votes were in the summer, and I couldn't get people to commit. I tried. I gave up. I couldn't get people to commit to that in the summertime. I could tell people wanted to do it, but everybody was still kind of thinking about it. And I didn't have a solid count. I didn't have a solid count when I threw it in. I thought my count was pretty good, but it was iffy. It was iffy, but I had some really good people helping me. I had Representative Phelps Anderson out of Roswell helping me on the Republican side, and I had Damon Eli helping me on the Democratic side. So we were really working the House together. Before the day before it went to the floor, I thought I had 42 votes, and when the final vote count, it was 51-18.
Nicely done, nicely done. It was one of the most exciting processes I've ever seen in the legislature. I was riveted throughout. Great performance.
Thank you. And I had a lot of good people helping me. You know, that debate, it was a 3-hour debate. So what you have to do is you have to really line up really solid backers with good evidence. So, you know, we split up the agenda and we said, you take the religious aspect, and you take the consumer protection stage, and you take the legal stage, and you take, so it's really, you know, you take the banking stage, and you take the credit union stage. I mean, it was really backing up all those players so that you have a cohesive argument that makes sense for 3 hours. That's an important part of legislation too.
That's what I meant by brilliantly done. I mean, it just didn't give the Alcones of the world an opportunity to come up and say how, you know, how this was going to harm poor people and so forth. They wouldn't be able to get loans. I thought that was so well done. By the time you were done, there was no room for opposition. It was clear that this was going to win. I'm sure you have other legislative priorities. What other bills have you been involved with, or do you see yourself becoming involved with in the next session?
Well, you you have local bills, and then you have statewide bills. As you mature as a legislator, I guess is how I would put it. As you gain more knowledge, my huge issue really now is kind of land and water. How are we gonna conduct state affairs in times of extreme drought and climate change? That's really the question. And you know, I look at that from a personal and a professional level. I mean, I've been without water at my house for 9 months. The well has gone dry. Water tables are going down in the north. You have to drill. We lived at that house for 32 years at 20 feet. With water coming at 20 feet deep. We now have to drill to 160 feet. In the north, you have all these rural communities, and you don't have access to, you know, you basically have wells and septic tanks on your property in rural northern New Mexico, or all of rural New Mexico, I should say. And so what I'm looking at is, how do we build infrastructure in this state, and how do we make meaningful infrastructure, and how do we put the money behind it? So that we can do the job that we really need to do for people in this state. And I'm looking at water legislation. I'm working now with Mike Hammond, who's the new state engineer, and Secretary Kenny at the environment, to say, how do we protect water resources, and how do we build up state budgets, and how do we make funds available to folks who live in rural parts of the state so that they can access clean drinking water and have and begin to have solid, you know, have the wastewater systems. I mean, most of us, you know, clean drinking water is hard enough to get. In addition to that, we have too many septic tanks. But as the population grows, you have more septics. Those leak. They can contaminate the groundwater systems, the aquifers. So we really need to have a huge cleanup program in this state, and an infrastructure program that is going to provide clean drinking water and wastewater systems for all of New Mexico. So I'm talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions, but we have to look at that. We have to have a state plan, and we have to have a plan for implementation over the next 10 years. I mean, we are at a good time in the state. I mean, we have state resources. It looks the projections for the next 5 years look pretty good. So we will have money, and we have a president now who believes in infrastructure. And so we've got some money coming in, but the question is, how do we merge local, state, and federal funding to really get these programs in place?
Okay, well, we'll be paying close attention to that because water is one of our major issues for retake as well. So we'll be right behind you. What would you say was your biggest disappointment over the last few years in the legislature?
Well, it was not passing the predatory bill. The first 3 years I tried to pass it, and it didn't happen until the 4th year. And so that was my big disappointment. I was very naive, though, I got to tell you. When I first started out, honest to God, I had no idea the power of the lobby against for that lending, for those lending monies. I actually thought, this is how naive I was. Oh, when everybody hears about this, they're going to automatically vote for this bill. I really, that's how naive I was. So I learned pretty fast. The first year it went through 2 committees. It never even gone through 2 committees before. Never made it to the House floor. Second year, I couldn't introduce it. Third year, we got it amended at 99% on the House floor, and then it died in committee. And the 4th year, we got it at 36 and got it signed by the governor. So I think my biggest disappointment is learning how long it takes to do something sometimes. Good work takes time. And, I was built.
Uh-oh, we just lost Susan completely. So we're going to pause this show. Susan seems to be back. So we lost Susan for just a minute there. I paused the show, but it may be a little choppy in there, but she had just about finished telling us about her commitment to water and land bills and infrastructure to address those kinds of issues. And I had stated that those were priorities for retake as well, and that we would be supportive of her. So that was where you had started. That was that your biggest disappointment is how long it takes for good bills to actually get through the legislature. And that's also a change that retake is viewing. We're recognizing that we have to take the long view, and that we may be introducing bills periodically, knowing they won't get through, but educating legislators and garnering support. So that's a lesson learned. Can you just tell us briefly what are some of the major issues you find with the state legislature and how it functions and how it might impede getting bit? Why does it take so long?
Well, we're a volunteer legislature. I'm just going to be very honest about this. It's a huge problem. So, I happen to be retired. I would have run before, but I couldn't afford to run. I had to have a job. I had to get to retirement before I could run. And we have a lot of young legislators who have young kids who try to do this job, and it's you can't do it. It's really, I honestly didn't know when I ran that this would be a year-round full-time job without pay. That's really what you're talking about. If you go to all the interim committee meetings, and it's important that you go to those meetings. You make relationships, but you also get to dive deep into issues and see issues at the local level. It's really important that you show up to those interim committee meetings. And I think it's time. We need a constitutional change. We need to pay legislators. We need to give them a decent salary. And, this isn't about me. This is about who follows me. Because if we do institute change, if we do call for a modernization of the legislature, it won't happen for 4 years because, even if we voted on a bill, it has to go through a constitutional amendment, which would be, have to be approved by the voters. So we're talking probably, if we're even lucky, 4 years from now. I mean, that would be great, or maybe 2 years, 3 years. It's a long time to to do a constitutional amendment, but we need to redo our constitution. And I think we actually need a constitutional convention. I mean, we need longer sessions. People think we have a, $8.5 million, what was it, $7.8 million budget. We really have like a $20 billion budget. If you include all the Medicaid and Medicare, all the transportation money that we oversee, that we combine with state funds, it's a huge budget. To say that you can do that in a 30-day session is ridiculous. We need
Or
3 months a year, or a 60-day session. 60 gives you a little longer time, but I mean, we don't have the time to carefully examine any of these. We just don't have the time. And then I basically work alone. What people should understand is legislators basically work alone. You don't have staff. You go to one meeting to another. My district is the size of Connecticut. So, just driving around, if I go to a meeting in Chama, it's a 6-hour day for one meeting. So when I go places, I try to put like 3 meetings in, 3 hours so that I can talk to many as people as I can, but I'm not unusual. There are a lot of rural legislators who have the same issues. And we just need to redo our constitution. The anti-donation clause has a lot of problems with it. Other states don't have that. We're constantly working against things in our constitution that maybe worked in 1910, but guess what? They don't work now. And we need to really change the system for legislators. I used to say, Paul, that this wasn't fair to legislators. I now say it's not fair to New Mexico citizens. It is not fair. I think we need full-time year-round offices. I think we need to be there to help people. I think we had have none of those opportunities, and other states are changing too. Oregon is in the process of changing. So a lot of states are just, met for like 1 month a year or every other year, really saying, times have changed. We've got to change with it. So I think the legislative process needs to totally be revamped.
Well, you've got a supporter here. I totally agree with every word you said. I need to take a quick break here to remind our listeners that KSFR is more important than ever, offering timely news and alerts and a wide range of programming to keep you sane in these challenging times. And with the plethora of misinformation out there, it's good to have a source of information that's reliable. And so KSFR is that source. So for those of you who can afford it, please consider making a contribution and think of that as your ticket to a wealth of important programming. Just go to ksfr.org and click on the donate button. Let's get back to our discussion with Susan Herrera. So the governor certainly made a statement in vetoing the junior bill. Do you think she had a valid point in vetoing it? And if so, how could she have made that point without ruffling quite so many feathers?
Well, we, as legislators, we really never get to really impact local communities with operating money. Capital outlay is for buildings, but I say buildings, an empty building isn't going to do anything. A person working at a job is going to do a lot. So we don't get junior money very often. I don't think she understood how deeply tied everybody was to that money. It's precious. You should know I put most of my money in in fundraising, helping people hire grant writers, the city and the county and our local COG. I mean, most of my money went to grant writing because that was a way of using money so that it could make more money, which is really what I'm interested in, especially in rural communities. You don't have staff capacity. Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Las Cruces, probably Farmington have grant writing people on staff that do this work. In small cities and small counties, you just don't have that. And they don't have the funds to hire. And so that's where I put my money. How do I use money to make more money? Is really what I tried to do. And you can't do that with capital outlay money. You can only do that with junior money. So I think she just, underestimated how important it was to local legislators, both Democrats and Republicans. And you know what? Guess what? Everybody makes mistakes. I make mistakes. You make mistakes, Paul. I would call this a mistake. It's as simple as that. And somebody shouldn't hold it against her. I think we're coming back. We've reached a compromise, and I think we're going to go back in. And I think Junior Buddy will be what can I say, appropriated again and
Restored.
voted on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I keep hearing. So that is a good thing, but it was an unforced error, man. The truth is that it gives Republicans an awful lot of ammunition for flyers about how she vetoed, funding for some 20 some odd police positions and first responders and homeless shelters and things like that. It was a mistake, as you state, though. We make mistakes.
Well, you can say that. I think overall she's been a really good governor. Really, we have to admit that. And she's kept people safe. So I think she's done a good job. Yeah. Does everybody make those mistakes? Yeah. Yeah. You move on, you correct it, and you move on. And I think that's what we're all doing. No harm, no foul.
Okay. All right. So you're being challenged in the primary. Who is your opponent, and why should District 41 voters choose you as their rep?
Well, my opponent is a man by the name of Marlo Martinez. He's never run for elected office. He's been appointed as a probate judge, but he was suspended. He was suspended from that for kind of violating, I think, the goodwill of the office. So he's running against me. There's a group of people. I mean, they say there's some PACs that are starting to support oppositions really to most Democrats. We'll see how that works. I don't think they're going to be that strong. I think I have a good reputation in my district. I think we have meetings set up, and we're going to try for 25 precincts, but so far we're at about 12. And a lot of these are fundraising meetings, and a lot of them are informational meetings. And it's really my job is to keep connecting with people and finding out what people need, how they want their state to run, what they think state government should do. And I try to do that. I meet with all my commissions and city council meetings, and I meet with a lot of acequias, and I try to meet with everybody. I'm holding 5 town hall meetings right now. One's dedicated to grandparents raising grandchildren.
Susan, I'm sorry, but we've reached the end of the radio show. We will continue our conversation on the YouTube recording for our listeners, but for Retake Our Democracy, we're out of time, and I have to say goodbye. I hate to do this so abruptly, but they have a very tight time frame. So that's it for today. We'll be back next week. Stay active, stay engaged. It's the only way we fix this mess. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we had to leave a little silence there so they saw where the radio show ended. 27:30. That's 30 seconds over. I think they'll be okay with that. All right, we're back, Susan. I'm sorry, you were talking about you're doing town halls and community meetings.
Yeah, we do. We're doing 5 town halls, one on grandparents raising grandkids, acequias, land grants, mutual domestic water systems, and also all the credit unions are going to get together, and we're going to try and help people get out of these predatory loans that we have in the north. So those are town hall meetings, and then we go off and start simultaneously doing election events.
Okay, so what are the values and principles that guide you in determining what bills you'll support and what you'll oppose?
Well, it's a good question. My values are really trying to figure out what people want their government to be. How do I assess that? And what can I do as a state legislator? Sometimes people think a state legislator or a congressperson or a senator can do everything, and so what you have to do is help educate people and say, here's what your city council does, here's what a state ledge does, here's what a U.S. congressperson can do, and here's what a senator does, so that people understand. Here's what a county commissioner can do. We all have different roles, but I think our major value and our major reason for running for office is to really serve people and work with them to figure out solutions to problems that are in our communities.
Mhm, mhm.
So let me give you an example. Water. Okay, so in a little community of Dixon and Budo, Rinconada, Apodaca, and Cañoncito, there are 3 mutual domestic water systems. Okay, I called people together for the first time. Now everybody goes to church and sees everybody on Sunday, but they never had a meeting in 20 years. I pulled people together in a meeting and I said, why don't we regionalize a water system and see if we can't do a regionalized drinking water system? Because on the other side of the highway, Rinconada and Budo have no water system. Why don't we combine all 3 of these? And if we could do that, we could put probably a 3-person staff together. We could pay for that. And we could also then maybe build a wastewater system in addition. So that's what we're working on. That's something.
So we lost Susan for a minute. She'll be right back. I'll pause.
This is interesting.
You might have to get rid of your video, Susan, because we're just having too many breakups.
Oh.
Breaking up is hard.
How's that?
That's good. You were talking about municipalizing the water system up there and moving 3 water districts into 1.
So yeah, so that's the thing we can work on. We need to, I take that idea and then I go back to the legislature and look at how water funds are distributed through the state. And it's interesting, we have water for something called the Tribal Infrastructure Fund, and we have water money for something called the Las Colonias Infrastructure Fund. But there are probably 600 water systems in rural parts of New Mexico that have no separate funding source. So I'm working on creating a separate funding source so that we can go in and get money to do these projects in rural frontier areas of the state.
Okay. That's a good example. And it's something Retake is very interested in, is municipalizing a lot of things, including our power systems, and just resurrecting the role of government generally. It got a bad rap in the Reagan years, and it's continued with the privatization of so many things. And there was a time when government was a significant actor in most of our lives, and a proactive and a positive force instead of a deterrent to progress. So we're going to work on that. I'm going to just ask you a question now. I've got 8 bills here that either were bills in the last session or will be bills in the next one. I think all of them were actually in this last session. And I'm just going to ask you real quickly to say, I support, strongly support, need more info, or oppose, or tend to oppose. And then we'll circle back and do a little bit of a conversation about some of them. So you ready?
Yeah, and I saw your list, but I'm going to say this is more about the idea rather than the actual bill, because
Okay,
I just
yes.
want to say, Paul, the devil's in the details on this stuff, and you know that. So
Right.
when I say, do I support an idea, because that's really what you're talking about right now.
Exactly.
An actual bill is a lot different than an idea, just so that the readers, the listeners understand too.
Yeah. Okay. So that is definitely an understanding. I mean, some of these things will, the nature of them is pretty obvious, but most of them not. Public bank.
Yeah, I think it's been done in North Dakota. Is it North or South? I can never
North
remember.
Dakota.
I think it's North Dakota that had a really good example of a public bank. I'm looking at that. I'm inclined to do it, but I haven't seen the bill. Don't know at this point.
Okay. Health Security Act.
For it.
Okay. Hydrogen hub.
That's another thing, we got hit with that bill like a month before the session. Everybody has to, it's not like you can learn about hydrogen hubs in 1 minute. I'm just gonna say, that's talking really, what's driving this is a lot of billions of dollars coming to the state. It's like the creation of a new laboratory. That's really what you're talking about. So
Right.
when you look at this, we have to be very, very careful. I've met with scientists at the lab, and I've also met with groups at the local level on hydrogen, just to kind of get input from both sides and see where everybody's at. And I'm looking at this very closely, as is everybody else. Again, we'll see what happens to that bill. And I think it was shut down because everybody understood there wasn't enough time to really do it in a short session.
I couldn't agree more. How about a study to evaluate the ways in which the state could better benefit economically and job-wise in the transition to renewable energy?
Totally. I mean, we should have the best wind energy and solar energy programs in the nation. We should have that. They are gearing up, not fast enough. We're all talking about how we do that better and how we put more money there.
Okay. Universal basic income study.
That's interesting. I'm waiting to hear about that. I'm waiting to hear about that. I'm watching what Alan Weber is doing closely in Santa Fe. That's an interesting thing where he takes students, at the poverty level and helping them. And so I think we're all looking at that closely. What does that mean? We did huge tax breaks in the last 4 years
Right.
for working families and lower income people. So I think we've done more for working families really in the last 4 years than the state has done in the last 20 years. So looking at the results on that, how's that going to work out, and how do we move forward in that direction?
Yeah, we still have like the poorest state in the country. So, we need to do more. What about the Green Amendment?
I had a few problems with the Green Amendment. It really didn't come up for a vote. I think it was killed in committee, as I recall, last session. I can't remember. Can you tell me?
Yes.
It was, and so I was kind of waiting to hear more on that. There were some definite problems, and we'll see how it progresses.
Okay. Tax credits for electric vehicles and rooftop solar.
Definitely.
I'm sorry, you broke up there, Susan.
I'm for it.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was saying I support that. Yeah.
Okay. Full funding for the New Mexico Environment Department to allow for closer monitoring of gas and oil operations.
Well, not only gas and oil, dry cleaners, you can include that in there too. That's interesting. We just met with the EPA rep for Region 6 from the federal level yesterday. Dr. Nance was here, and Rebecca Roos in the Environment Department was here in Espanola, and we were talking about there was a huge problem. It was a 40-year-old dry cleaning company. They had a leak of this chemical that really destroyed the drinking water for Espanola. It has taken 30 years, and we're just almost at the point where we're going to eliminate this damage. It went on Pueblo lands, went underneath the city of Espanola. So yes, I'm working with the Environment Department right now to say, how do we need to have tough legislation. We want our businesses to survive, but not at the expense of drinking water for your entire community. There are 15 Superfund sites in this.
Start recording.
Okay.
Go ahead, Susan.
I don't know where I left off. I'm sorry.
You're talking
That's
about
another
meeting
thing
with the
I'm working
EPA.
is. Oh yeah, and Dr. Nance and they're putting a lot of money into cleanup all over the country, and we hope to get some of that federal funding. Roswell has a problem with a Superfund site, same thing, a dry cleaning business. So I'm working with the Department of Environment. I'm gonna introduce legislation that really does more prevention and trains people, and so the businesses know exactly what they're getting into when they start a company, and also that city and county planners know how to oversee businesses like this so that they don't ruin water systems for people. It's that simple. I mean, it's that complex and that difficult. It's not a simple problem at all. It's a huge problem in our state.
Huge problem with a very simple solution. Put some money into actually preventing these kinds of things. So
No, here's what you should know. Here's what you should know, Paul. I just had this conversation yesterday. I said, it's our job as legislators to put enough money in the environment department and enough money in the state engineer's office so that people can actually solve problems. I mean, we need people that will implement a 50-year water plan, not somebody who'll just read it. We need implementation, and we need a strong staff to support that effort. And we're talking about millions of dollars a year. And the same thing in the environment department. If you don't, if you have a law and you can't implement it because you don't have funding, then you don't have a law. That's the
right,
problem.
right. That's the problem. And when you've got billions of dollars coming in from gas and oil and likely a huge surplus again next year, there ought to be a way that you can find some funds to protect the environment and our people. And
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so let's shift gears, and we're gonna take a look at the global effort or non-effort to address climate change. The IPCC just released yet another report on the state of the planet, and it's even more dire than the last report. The window is rapidly closing on us when the world can stave off the worst of the consequences coming from warming the climate. New Mexico is sitting in a difficult spot. In some ways, it's a microcosm of the international situation. We have an outsized reliance on oil and gas revenue that is coming from drilling in the Permian Basin in northwest New Mexico. And yet that reliance comes with a steep price tag in terms of the future we are leaving for future generations. Environmentalists and legislators have asked the state to hit a pause on new drilling activity, but that was an effort that fell on largely deaf ears. Do you see a path forward where we can reduce our reliance on gas and oil and start to wind down our drilling activities? And if so, where does that begin?
That's a very difficult question to answer. And I think everybody listeners should know that, as you know, Paul, we really depend on gas and oil. That's the paycheck for the state. So how do we encourage, renewable energies and at the same time work with gas and oil so that what they do is not so harmful to the environment, and how we use new technologies to bring about that change. But to tell you that I would close down everything that funds this state, you couldn't do that as a legislator, and people need to understand that. They need to really know that. They provide needed wealth for this.
We're having trouble with the connection with Susan again. She'll be back in a second. I'm just going to pause.
Okay.
So we're back with Susan, and this is an advertisement for our need for better broadband in the state, because we've had to pause this conversation like 5 or 6 times. Susan, you said you were talking about a bill that passed this session to put more money into broadband. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. We passed a group of 8 women legislators during COVID, when we all shut down. We were teachers and people like me, grandmothers, and we were watching all our kids just really struggling, and our teachers. And we said, well, why don't we try and see what we can do? So we would meet every Friday on Zoom. Remember when we didn't know how to use Zoom? We all learned how to get on Zoom. This was in 2020, I guess. And We'd meet every Friday for 2 hours and we interviewed people, we talked to people, we came up with a bill called Connect New Mexico. And it was huge because we changed the authority of the Department of Information Technology. We also put an advisory council there. More importantly, well, not most important, but we did give, we had like a dig once policy, you know, when you're digging a road for a highway, you ought to lay the cable at the same time. There are all these problems that we tried to solve within this bill, and we did a piece of good work. We also put 136 million into that bill because most of this funding for internet is federal. But they required like either a 10 or 15% match. So what happens is people would get these great grants and then they couldn't come up with the matches. So we have that set aside for people. So it was a huge bill, passed both houses and signed by the governor, and it's being implemented now. But yeah, I'm sitting in the middle. I'm sitting on a major street in Espanola, and we're having internet problems. So we just got Teresa Ledger Fernandez just gave us almost $1 million to do a wireless system in Espanola. So that'll be good. And we have companies coming in and doing, you know, fiber optic and all these other things that you need. So there is money there. You don't change internet connections in a day. You know, like any utility, it takes a long time. It takes a long time to do it. But I think within the next 3 years, I think people will start seeing major changes. I hope.
I sure hope so. So we're winding down towards the end of the interview. I would just wanted to ask you, what kind of advocacy strategies are most effective in causing you to rethink your position on something? And how can advocates be even more effective in moving their legislators?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. You know, I used to work for the Lano Foundation. I was the CEO of the Lano Foundation, and our motto was, "In God we trust, all others bring data." I think that's kind of a helpful tool, you know. So don't show me your opinions. Show me what the cost is, who it's going to impact. How will we know if we've made a difference? I mean, you know, when I used to look at programs, I used to ask 5 questions. One, and this was when I was a foundation director, is it replicable? Is it scalable? Is it cost effective? I mean, I know I can do that for $10,000 a kid. Can I do it for 500? Will it make a significant difference in the lives of children or people? And how will I know? So I think those are 5 good questions to ask whenever you have a program that comes before you, or an idea and people say they want to do this. I think you have to be able to answer all those questions. And I'll tell you how we got that predatory lending bill passed. We had the data. Linda Trujillo had passed a bill. No, it wasn't. I'm sorry. It was Georgine Lewis had passed a bill calling for data from the Financial Institution Division of the state. So we had actual data showing how much these loans cost, where they were at, who applied for them, I printed out all that data. I printed out the cost of a loan for a $5,000 loan at 175 was like $13,000 over a 5-year period. We had all that data, and we walked everybody through that data in the House, and they knew exactly what they were voting for. They knew how much money you'd pay for a 36% loan, and that was high enough, let me tell you. So I think if you have good data that shows exactly how this will change, I think that's your most effective tool.
Okay, well, we'll keep that in mind. Good advice. If you look into your crystal ball, who do you see emerging as the next Speaker of the House?
Oh, I don't know yet. We'll see. This is, you know, these elections, this is not going to be a simple election. There are a lot of people out on both sides that are really trying to change the system. So we'll see if they do or if they don't. And you know, when you have a House come together, then you know what you're going to get, and you really can't call it before that.
Right. Because it sort of depends on a lot of these primaries where we were talking earlier. There are 4 really good progressive Democrats, in the north of Santa Fe, who are all being challenged by moderate Democrats, quote unquote, moderate Democrats, corporate Democrats, it looks like to us. And depending on how those races go, that will make a big difference on how the speaker vote goes. Is that not correct?
I think so. You know, my opponent's being backed by predatory lenders, so that started that. So you know, our motto in the North is "Let no good deed go unpunished." That's what you should know, Paul. So you know, um, you just work forward, doing what you can do. I'm talking to a lot of people who are excited about my race and want to see me back there. So that's what I'm working on.
Okay. If you could be the chair of any committee, what would it be and why?
Hmm. You know, I chose to be the chair of something called Rural Development, Land Grants, and Cultural Affairs. The speaker in the last session had closed down the Land Grant Committee, and I called him up. You know, he was on vacation. I kind of felt bad about it, but I said, you know, I think this is not a good thing. I think we need to work to reinstate this. And so we got all the land grant people together, the Acequia people together, and the and uh, and and we pulled him together and we had a meeting and talked about why this was important. And I volunteered to be the chair of this committee if the speaker wanted it. He appointed me as chair. So I think I'm running the committee I need to run. And that's a lot for a sophomore in the House. Usually you wait a few more years before you're a committee chair. So I think that was sign of the speaker's faith in me. And I know the work that we need to do, and it is about rural development in the unincorporated rural parts of our state. So I'm going to tie this interim session. I hope to show people how we integrate both the local, state, and federal funding, how to build rural infrastructure in our state, like broadband, like water, like wastewater systems, all of those things. We just need to tackle in a major way and get the money behind it to actually do the job. That's
Okay.
what I'm working on. I chose that committee, and that's what I'm doing.
Okay. Well, thank you. We have to close out the show now. So I want to thank you for taking the time to do this, Susan. And I'd also like you to just tell our listeners now where they can find out more about your campaign and what they can do to support you.
Okay, my website is SusanHerrera.com. You can go there. The name of my campaign is Working Families for Susan Herrera. You can go to Act Blue if you want to make a donation, and you can call my campaign office at 505-579-0092. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, well, we'll get that information up on our website as well, Susan. So thank you very
Oh,
much for
thank you.
being with me today
Thanks.
and bearing with the internet challenges.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you very much, and you have a good weekend.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Retake, folks. We'll be back next week. Be sure and listen, because we're going to be talking with legislators, one after another, good Democrats running for office. So we want to make sure that you know who's running and why you need to support them. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.